January 4, 1880, Reading Eagle, Reading, Pennsylvania. Mineral World Flowers. Talismanic influences attributed to gems, why they are sought for, the properties of the diamond, emerald, hyacinth, and topaz, a serpent with eyes of jacinth. There can be no doubt that the many-aged belief in the occult virtues of precious stones had added greatly to the prestige of these beautiful flowers of the mineral world. Many writers have endeavored to explain the reason for the passionate eagerness to acquire objects, which are easily counterfeited so as to deceive the inexperienced eye, and which, the diamond excepted, are of no practical use whatever. The true cause certainly seems to lie in the fact that tradition has lent its aid to endue them with the charm of poetry and romance, and has so perpetuated their influence. Bacon says, "There are many things that operate upon the spirits of man by secret sympathy and antipathy. That precious stones have virtue in the wearing has been anciently and generally received, and they are said to produce several effects. So much is true that gems have fine spirits, as appears by their splendor, and therefore may operate, by consent, on the spirits of men, to strengthen and liberate them. The best stones for this purpose are the diamond, the emerald, the hyacinth, and the yellow topaz. As for their particular properties, no credit can be given to them, but it is manifest that light above all things rejoices the spirits of men, and probably varied light has the same effect with greater novelty, which may be one cause why precious stones exhilarate." Renodius, quoted by Burton, Anatomy of Melancholy, admires precious stones because they adorn kings, crowns, grace the fingers, enrich our household stuff, defend us from enchantments, preserve health, cure diseases. They drive away grief, cares, and exhilarate the mind. No people were more credulous as to the mysterious powers of precious stones than the Jews and the nations bordering on them. Among the Arabians, serpents were supposed to possess precious stones of inestimable virtue. This belief was current through many ages. In Timberlake's Discourse of the Travels of Two English Pilgrims to Jerusalem, Gaza, and so forth, 1611, we find an account of a great jewel which was taken from a serpent's head and used in conjuring. In Alfonso's Clericalic Disciplina, a serpent is mentioned with eyes of real jacinth. In the romantic history of Alexander, he is said to have found serpents in the Vale of Jordan with collars of huge emeralds growing on their backs. Milton gives his serpent eyes of carbuncle. A marvelous stone was said to be found in the serpent's brain, but in order to secure its luster and potent influences, it was to be extracted from the living animal. To the snake, a popular superstition is still attached in the East. In the narrative of A Voyage in Her Majesty's Ship, Samarang, Captain Sir Edward Belcher says, "At my last interview with the Sultan of Gunung Tabor, he conveyed into my hand, suddenly closing it with great mystery, what they term here the snake stone. This is a polished globe of quartz about the size of a musket ball, which he described as of infinite value, an heirloom, and reported to be extracted from the head of an enchanted snake." Allusions to serpentstone are frequent in the early writers. Apropos of the toad, the philosophers taught that, though ugly and venomous, it yet wears a precious jewel in its head. Lupton, in his Book of Notable Things, instructs his reader how to procure it. "You shall know whether toadstone be the right or perfect stone or not. Hold the stone before a toad, so that he may see it. And if it be a right and true stone, the toad will leap toward it, and make as though he would snatch it. He envieth so much that none should have that stone. If swallowed, it was a certain antidote against poison, and it was usual to take it as a precautionary pill, rather a hard one, before eating." In the Philosophical Transactions, 6th volume, page 21, we find that the toadstone was supposed, in the Highlands, to prevent the burning of houses and the sinking of boats. And if the commander in the field had one about him, he would either be sure to win the day, or all his men would die on the spot. In the inventory of the jewels of Charles V, made at Eusta after his death, is the entry of a box of black leather hued with crimson velvet, containing 4 bezoar stones, variously set in gold, one of which the emperor directed to be given to William van Meek, his gentleman of the chamber, being sick, as it was suspected, of the plague. In the same inventory is mentioned a blue stone with 2 clasps of gold, good for the gout. Faith in the virtue of certain precious stones for the cure of diseases was transmitted from early ages to a comparatively late period. In the church of Old St. Paul's, London, was a famous sapphire, given by Richard de Preston, citizen and grocer, for curing infirmities of the eyes. In reference to Queen Elizabeth's assumed power of healing scrofulous patients by the royal touch, it was said of Vaughan, Bishop of Chester, that she did it by virtue of some precious stones of the crown of England that possessed such a miraculous gift. Harrington, however, observes slyly, had Queen Elizabeth been told that the bishop ascribed more virtue to her jewels, though she loved them well, than to her person, she would never have made him Bishop of Chester. The wonderful effects of stones found in various animals are too numerous to mention. The brain of a tortoise contained one that had the effect of a fire annihilator in extinguishing flames. Birds were especially distinguished for the possession of talismanic stones. The hyena was very properly hunted, not, however, for its ferocious propensities, but for a precious stone in one of its eyes, full of mystic virtues. One of the most curious superstitions, and one which has been a pleasant theme with writers of all ages, is connected with the carbuncle, or ruby. Aelian has a singular story on this subject, how a certain widow, Herculea, had tended a young stork which had broken its leg, and how the grateful bird, returning from its annual migration, dropped into her lap a precious stone, which, on her awakening at night, lighted up her chamber like a blazing torch. The fabulous animal, called the carbunculo, said to have been seen in some parts of Peru, is represented to be about the size of a fox, with long black hair, and is only visible at night when it sinks slowly through the thickets. If followed, it is said to open a flap or valve in the forehead, from which an extraordinary and brilliant light issues. The natives believe that the light proceeds from a precious stone, and that any person who may venture to grasp at it rashly is blinded. Then the flap is let down, and the animal disappears in the darkness. Innumerable were the effects produced by certain precious stones. Among others, the heliotrope had especial virtues. It was called by necromancers the Babylonian gem, and, if rubbed over with the juice of the herb of its own name, it rendered the wearer invisible. The moonstone was, as its name implies, venerated from its lunar attraction. It is one of the prettiest, though most common, of precious stones in Ceylon. Pliny describes it as containing an image of the moon, which, if the story be true, he observes, daily waxes or wanes, according to the state of that luminary. Chalcedony hung about the neck dispersed sadness, and, if a person carried one perforated with the hairs of an ass run through it, he would overcome all disasters. Crystal dispelled witchcraft. The chrysoprasus gladdened the heart. The chrysolite expelled phantoms and, what was more serviceable, rid people of their follies. The onyx in the Middle Ages was believed to prevent ugly dreams by night and lawsuits by day. The jasper was a charmer of scorpions and spiders, and was worn as a talisman by the Roman athlete. Burton, in the Anatomy of Melancholy, tells us that, if hung about the neck or taken in drink, it much resisteth sorrow and recreates the heart. The same qualities were attributed to the hyacinth and topaz. The crystal has been the most popular of all oracular stones. A favorite stone was the beryl, which, says Aubrey in his Miscellanies, is a kind of crystal that has a weak tincture of red. In this, magicians see visions. The custom was to consecrate or charge them, as the modern term is, for which purpose set forms were used, which are described in Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft. The famous crystal of that prince of quackery, Dr. Dee, is preserved in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. The properties of the ruby were endless. Bruised in water, it was a panacea for all complaints. It had the peculiarity, wherever worn, of discovering its presence by its luster, which would shine through the thickest clothes. powdered agate was an infallible remedy for all the ills that life is heir to. Pliny quotes the Magi as teaching in Persia that storms could be averted by burning agates. The amethyst would prove a boon to modern tipplers if, as the ancients asserted, it prevented intoxication. The sapphire and the emerald strengthened the sight, a property said to also have been possessed by the turquoise, but it could confer a still more wonderful gift on the wearer. Whoever, says Van Helmont, wears a turquoise so that it, or its gold setting, touches the skin, may fall from any height, and the stone attracts to itself the whole force of the blow, so that it cracks, and the person is safe. The Romans regarded the diamond with superstitious reverence, and Pliny tells us that it baffles poison, keeps off insanity, and dispels vain fears. Ben Mansour, alluding to the electric properties of the diamond, says, "It has an affinity for gold, small particles of which fly toward it. It is also wonderfully sought after by ants, who crowd over it as though they would swallow it up." A marvelous curative power was supposed to exist in a diamond belonging to the Raja of Matara in the island of Borneo, the Malays believing that a draught of water in which it had been placed would cure every disease. Professor J. McIntosh.